Tammy Lynn Leppert disappeared one quiet morning in Rockledge, but that quietness carried an unsettling feeling. No mirror, no makeup, no preparation typical of a girl who had lived under the public eye. Just a bag, bare feet, and a car ride toward Cocoa Beach that ended in an argument. Tammy stepped out of the parking lot near Glass Bank, then vanished from the world, right in the middle of a bustling crowd. No trace, no witnesses, only the fear she had once expressed. I saw something. Well, the house in Rockledge is quiet that morning, but not in the way it usually is. Tammy Lynn Leppert moves through the rooms without stopping at the mirrors. Her mother notices this immediately. Tammy has always treated preparation as part of being seen. Hair first, then makeup, then clothes chosen with care. Even on days when she is not going anywhere important, the routine remains. That morning, it does not. Linda Curtis stands near the kitchen counter, watching her daughter cross the room. "You're not getting ready?" she asks. Tammy does not answer right away. She adjusts the strap of her purse, then opens it, checking inside as if to make sure nothing has been moved. "I'm going out for a bit," she says. "Where?" her mother asks. Tammy hesitates. Not long enough to look uncertain, but long enough to avoid the question. "I'll be back," she says instead. The answer does not satisfy, but it is not unusual enough to stop her. Tammy is 18. She has spent most of her life being directed. Where to stand, how to smile, when to speak. Independence, even when it appears suddenly, is not automatically alarming. What stands out is what she does not do. She does not sit down. She does not eat. She does not change her clothes again. Her hair remains loose and uneven, untouched by the brushes lined neatly on her dresser. Makeup stays in its place. Shoes remain by the door. Tammy steps outside barefoot, the concrete already warm. A car is waiting. The young man behind the wheel is someone she knows. Not a stranger, not someone pulled from the road. She opens the passenger door and gets in without hesitation. The car pulls away from the house and turns east. The drive toward Cocoa Beach is familiar. Tammy has traveled this route many times, often with her mother, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends connected to modeling or film work. The road opens toward the coast. Traffic thickens. The air changes. Inside the car, voices rise. The argument does not begin immediately. It builds, sparked by something said and not taken back. The details are never fully shared, only that it escalates quickly. Tammy's voice grows sharper. The driver responds defensively. "You're not listening," Tammy says. "I am listening," he replies, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "You're not making sense." "That's not what I said," she snaps. The car continues moving. By the time they reach Cocoa Beach, the disagreement has reached a point where neither is willing to continue. The driver signals and pulls into a parking lot beside a bank building made of glass, its surface reflecting the sky and passing cars. An Exxon station sits nearby. Beach access points line the road. "This is ridiculous," he says, braking hard. "Just get out." Tammy opens the door without protest. She steps onto the pavement, purse in hand. "You didn't have to bring me here," she says. "I didn't know where else to go," he replies. She closes the door. The car pulls back into traffic. Tammy stands still for a moment. Cars pass. People walk in and out of nearby businesses. No one looks at her long enough to remember her. This is the last confirmed place she is seen. At that moment, nothing marks it as important. Tammy Lynn Leppert is not anonymous in her own life. By 18, she has spent more time being watched than most people twice her age. Born in Rockledge, she entered beauty pageants as a child, winning again and again, accumulating titles that taught her how to stand under lights and wait for judgment. She moved from pageants into swimsuit modeling, then into film, appearing briefly in Little Darlings and Spring Break. Her body appears on promotional material even when her name does not. Only weeks earlier, she had been on a movie set in Los Angeles for Scarface. She left abruptly and came home without explanation. Since then, her behavior has changed. Friends notice it. Her mother notices it. Tammy becomes guarded, selective about what she eats, what she drinks, who she trusts. She has said more than once, "I saw something." When asked what she means, she does not explain. "What would you say?" she asks her mother days earlier. "If I told you someone was trying to kill me?" That question hangs over the morning without being spoken again. By late afternoon, Tammy has not returned home. Linda Curtis checks the clock more than once. Tammy is usually precise about time. Even when plans change, she calls. Even when upset, she does not disappear. As evening approaches, concern replaces waiting. Linda begins calling people Tammy knows. Friends from modeling. People connected to film work. No one has seen her. No one is expecting her. No one knows where she is. The phone calls grow shorter. When the sun begins to lower, Linda contacts the Cocoa Beach Police Department. The report is taken seriously, but cautiously. Tammy is 18. She is legally an adult, but the officer on the line listens carefully as Linda explains the recent psychiatric observation, the fear of being harmed, the argument, the drop-off location. "This isn't like her," Linda says. "She wouldn't just leave." Officers respond. They document the last known movements. They record the name of the young man who dropped her off. They log the location. Glass Bank parking lot. State Road A1A, between 2nd and 3rd Street North. An officer drives to the site. The lot is empty now. No purse, no shoes, no sign that anyone struggled. Traffic continues along the road. The beach does not change its rhythm. The absence is immediate and complete. That night, Tammy Lynn Leppert is classified as an endangered missing person. The search begins without a direction, anchored only to a place where she was last known to stand and a silence that offers no explanation. The first hours after Tammy Lynn Leppert fails to return home pass without a clear sense of emergency, but the absence does not resolve itself. Evening arrives in Rockledge without explanation, and by nightfall, the uncertainty has narrowed into a single fact. No one knows where she is, and no one has heard from her since she stepped out of a car along State Road A1A. The missing person report reaches the Cocoa Beach Police Department the same day. Tammy is 18 years old, which places her on the boundary between a runaway adult and a vulnerable missing person. But the context provided by her mother complicates that classification immediately. Officers are informed that Tammy had been released from a 72-hour psychiatric observation only days earlier, that she had expressed fear for her safety, and that she had been dropped off barefoot in a public parking lot after an argument. The case is entered as endangered missing. The first priority is establishing the last verified point in time and space. Officers contact the male friend who drove Tammy to Cocoa Beach. His statement is taken and logged. He describes an argument during the drive, escalating to the point where he chose to pull into the Glass Bank parking lot and leave her there. He does not report physical violence. He does not claim she asked him to stay. He identifies the exact location. There are no contradictions in his account that can be immediately challenged, and no evidence at that moment to contradict it. That location becomes the center of the search. Early the next morning, officers return to the Glass Bank parking lot. The site offers no natural boundaries. It is open on all sides, exposed to traffic, bordered by businesses that serve a constant flow of people. There is no secluded corner, no blind spot that clearly explains how someone could be taken without notice. The ground shows no disturbance. There are no personal items left behind. Whatever happened here did not announce itself. The surrounding area is canvassed in a widening pattern. Officers check nearby businesses along A1A, beginning with the Exxon station closest to the drop-off point. Employees are asked if they remember seeing a barefoot young woman the previous afternoon. None do. The question is repeated at other storefronts. The responses remain consistent. The day was busy. People came and went. Nothing stood out. Beach access points are checked next. Patrol officers walk along the shoreline, scanning for signs of recent presence. In summer, the beach resets itself quickly. Footprints are erased by tide and wind within hours. There is no indication that Tammy walked far in either direction, but there is also no proof that she did not. Back at the police department, officers begin assembling a timeline using what little they have. Tammy leaves home around 11 in the morning. She is dropped off in Cocoa Beach early that afternoon. By evening, she is unaccounted for. The window is narrow, but it is also empty. Linda Curtis spends the same days making her own inquiries. She contacts friends, acquaintances, and people connected to Tammy's modeling and film work. Each call ends the same way. No one has seen her. No one is waiting for her. No one was expecting her to arrive. The absence of a destination becomes as important as the absence of a witness. As the search continues, police begin receiving tips almost immediately, but none of them solidify. A woman believes she may have seen someone resembling Tammy walking along the highway later that afternoon. The description is close, but not definitive. The time is uncertain. No corroboration emerges. The report is logged and closed. Another tip places her further south along the coast. Officers check the area. No confirmation. The investigation is still active, but its shape is becoming clear. There is no crime scene to process, only a last known location that offers no physical evidence. There is no financial trail to follow. Tammy left without money. There is no digital trail, no calls, no messages, no indication she contacted anyone after leaving the parking lot. The case advances by elimination rather than discovery. Several days into the search, the first anomalous phone call is received. An unidentified woman contacts the police department and states that Tammy Leppert is alive. She does not provide a location. She does not provide a method of contact. She says only that Tammy will reach out when she is ready. The call ends without escalation. There is no number to trace. The call is documented. It introduces a new variable without supplying evidence. Investigators cannot dismiss it outright, but they cannot act on it either. Search efforts continue in parallel. Hospitals in the region are contacted. No unidentified patients match Tammy's description. Shelters are checked. No reports. Patrol officers in surrounding jurisdictions are notified to remain alert for a barefoot young woman matching her appearance. The second call arrives days later. This time, the unidentified woman offers a specific claim. Tammy is pursuing nursing school. The detail suggests intention and continuity, but no location is given. Investigators attempt to verify the claim through available channels, contacting local and regional nursing programs. No enrollment records match Tammy's name. The lead stalls. As the days stretch into weeks, the investigation encounters its first structural limitation. Any surveillance cameras that might have existed near the Glass Bank parking lot are privately owned, and requests for footage do not produce usable results. Either recordings have been overwritten or no cameras covered the exact area. The visual trail ends where it began. At this stage, two broad possibilities are considered, neither gaining dominance. The first is voluntary departure. Tammy is legally an adult. She could have chosen to leave, but the practical constraints undermine the theory. No money, no shoes, no personal belongings beyond a purse, no communication with anyone she trusts. The second is abduction. The location allows for quick entry into traffic and rapid departure, but the absence of witnesses, noise, or struggle complicates that explanation as well. The case remains suspended between these interpretations, with no evidence strong enough to anchor either. By the end of the first week, the search has covered the immediate geography without yielding direction. What remains is a record of effort rather than progress. Interviews conducted, locations checked, tips evaluated and closed. The investigation is active, but the disappearance itself has already hardened into a problem defined by what cannot be recovered. Tammy Lynn Leppert has vanished from a public place without leaving behind the kind of trace that early investigations depend on. The search continues, but it does so with the understanding that the critical moment may already be beyond reach. As the initial search yields nothing concrete, the investigation begins to change shape, not through a formal announcement but through a gradual adjustment in focus. The early assumption that Tammy Lynn Leppert might be located quickly, by retracing her steps, by canvassing the immediate area, by identifying a witness who noticed something out of place, gives way to a quieter realization that whatever happened after she exited the vehicle did not leave an obvious footprint. The case remains active, but the nature of activity shifts. Officers begin reviewing Tammy's recent history more closely, not as background color but as potential context for risk. Attention turns back to the weeks leading up to July 6th, especially the behavioral changes that preceded her disappearance. Statements taken earlier from family and friends are read again, this time not for timeline accuracy but for pattern. Tammy's withdrawal after returning from a party weeks earlier stands out. So does her repeated insistence that she had witnessed something she was not meant to see. The fear is not described as generalized anxiety. It is specific, directional, focused on unnamed people rather than vague danger. This distinction matters to investigators because it introduces the possibility that the disappearance did not begin at the Glassbank parking lot, but somewhere earlier, with something Tammy believed could not be escaped by staying visible. At the same time, law enforcement remains cautious. Psychological distress alone does not explain a disappearance. Officers are careful not to build an explanation that relies entirely on fear without evidence of threat. The challenge becomes separating what Tammy believed from what can be verified. This tension shapes the next phase of inquiry. Investigators begin reaching outward, beyond Cocoa Beach, into broader patterns of crime active in Florida at the time. The victim profile is difficult to ignore. Young, conventionally attractive, publicly visible through modeling and film, accustomed to being approached by strangers for professional reasons. These traits do not define guilt or cause, but they do define vulnerability within certain criminal contexts. Names begin to surface, not as accusations but as points of comparison. One such figure is a man known for targeting young women through false promises of modeling work, someone whose methods rely on trust, ambition, and public spaces rather than force. His activities are known to span multiple states, including Florida. Investigators examine whether his movements intersect with Tammy's last known location or recent professional engagements. They review known timelines. They look for overlap. Nothing concrete emerges. Another individual, known locally for violent sexual offenses and suspected in multiple disappearances, is also examined. His proximity to Brevard County draws attention. His criminal history demands scrutiny. Again, investigators search for connection points, places, times, witnesses. Again, the trail does not firm up. What becomes increasingly clear is that Tammy's disappearance does not fit neatly into any single pattern. There is no evidence of prearranged contact, no confirmed meeting set up in advance. There is no sign she was lured under professional pretenses on the day she vanished. Whatever occurred after she was dropped off appears to have been immediate rather than planned weeks ahead. At the same time, the idea of a purely impulsive crime remains difficult to reconcile with the setting. The Glassbank parking lot is not isolated. It is not hidden. It is exposed in ways that should deter opportunistic violence. For such an event to occur without witnesses would require speed, confidence, and a willingness to act in plain view. As these possibilities are weighed, the investigation begins to slow, not because effort decreases, but because momentum does. Leads take longer to appear. Each new tip requires more verification and yields less return. The early sense that the case might turn on a single overlooked detail begins to fade. Internally, the file grows thicker. Notes accumulate. Interviews are indexed. The timeline remains unchanged. Tammy is still last seen standing in that parking lot. Her mother continues to press for answers, not with accusations but with insistence. She repeats that Tammy was afraid before she disappeared. She emphasizes that the fear was not imagined in the abstract, but directed. She questions whether enough attention is being given to what Tammy claimed to have seen. Investigators listen. The statements are documented, but without corroboration, they cannot be advanced beyond context. The unidentified phone calls remain unresolved. They are not dismissed, but they cannot be confirmed. The absence of traceable information limits their usefulness. They sit in the case file as anomalies, neither proof of life nor evidence of deception. As weeks pass, the practical consequences of time become unavoidable. Surveillance footage that might once have existed is no longer available. Witness memory degrades. The volume of people who passed through the area that day makes retroactive identification nearly impossible. The investigation reaches a point where it must acknowledge what it no longer has access to. This is where the case begins to cool, not through neglect, but through exhaustion of immediate avenues. Police continue to accept tips. They continue to follow up, but the nature of the work changes from searching to monitoring, from canvassing to waiting. The emphasis shifts toward long-term identification rather than short-term recovery. Tammy Lynn Leppert is still classified as endangered missing. No assumption is made about her fate. No official theory is declared dominant. The case remains open, but it no longer moves daily. For those closest to her, the passage of time does not resolve uncertainty. It reshapes it. Each unanswered question becomes more firmly embedded. Each theory becomes harder to test. What remains unresolved is not only where Tammy went after she was left in that parking lot, but whether the disappearance was an endpoint or a continuation of something that began weeks earlier, when her behavior first changed and fear entered her daily life. The investigation now exists in that space between action and stasis, defined by a single afternoon that cannot be reconstructed and a series of warnings that cannot be verified. Tammy Lynn Leppert is missing, and the case enters its longest phase, one where answers, if they exist, will not arrive quickly or cleanly, and where the search for truth depends less on urgency than on endurance. As the search for Tammy Lynn Leppert stretches beyond the initial weeks, the investigation is no longer defined by geography alone. Cocoa Beach is no longer the only frame. The case begins to move outward, pulled by patterns larger than Tammy herself, patterns already familiar to law enforcement in Florida during the early 1980s. Attention turns toward known predators. This shift does not happen suddenly, nor is it driven by a single piece of evidence. It emerges from the collision between Tammy's profile and a growing awareness of how certain crimes unfold in public spaces without warning. She is young, visible, and accustomed to being approached by strangers in professional contexts. She has spent years being evaluated, invited, and assessed based on appearance alone. In the language of investigation, she fits a category that officers have learned to treat with caution. Names begin circulating internally. One of them is Christopher Wilder. Wilder's pattern is already known. He approaches young women in malls, parking lots, and public venues, presenting himself as a photographer or talent scout. He speaks the language of opportunity. He offers legitimacy. His victims often comply voluntarily, believing they are entering a professional exchange rather than a threat. For investigators working Tammy's case, the overlap is impossible to ignore. The location where Tammy disappeared, a visible, commercial corridor, fits the kind of environment Wilder exploits. Officers begin checking timelines. They compare known movements. They look for overlap between Wilder's confirmed locations and Tammy's disappearance window. They examine whether Tammy's modeling background could have made her receptive to an approach framed as work rather than danger. None of this produces confirmation, but it introduces a narrative that feels coherent enough to pursue. The case draws outside attention. Media outlets begin framing Tammy's disappearance not only as a missing person case, but as a possible entry in a larger pattern of violence against young women in Florida. Her beauty pageant history, her film work, and her sudden psychological collapse are presented together, creating a story that feels cinematic and ominous. The public response shifts accordingly. Tammy is no longer just missing. She is at risk from someone already known to be dangerous. The Leppert family becomes aware of this framing. Linda Curtis listens to the theory without rejecting it, but it does not fully align with what she knows about her daughter's fear. Tammy had not spoken about a stranger approaching her. She had spoken about something she saw, something already in motion. Still, the serial predator theory offers something the case lacks: a shape. Law enforcement continues down that path. Investigators examine another figure, operating closer to Brevard County, a man known for violent sexual crimes and suspected in multiple disappearances. His proximity raises concern. His history demands scrutiny. Again, timelines are compared. Again, locations are checked. Again, no direct link emerges. What these inquiries do produce is delay. The investigation becomes partially absorbed into other investigations, broader ones, where Tammy's disappearance is one possibility among many. Her case is referenced, compared, and cross-checked, but not advanced. It exists within a constellation of unsolved crimes, rather than as a singular event demanding its own explanation. At the same time, Tammy's personal narrative begins to flatten in public discourse. Her psychological distress becomes a footnote. Her statements about witnessing something dangerous are mentioned less frequently. The emphasis shifts toward how she fits known patterns, rather than how her behavior diverged from them. In effect, the investigation gains direction, but loses specificity. This redirection has consequences. While serial killer hypotheses are examined, other lines of inquiry stagnate. The unidentified phone calls are not connected to predator profiles. The argument with the male friend remains isolated, treated as context rather than a focal point. The possibility of a targeted disappearance tied to something Tammy encountered weeks earlier receives less operational attention, not because it is disproven, but because it lacks a framework investigators can act on. Public perception follows law enforcement's lead. Tammy is increasingly discussed alongside other victims, her individuality blurred by association. The question becomes not what happened to Tammy Lynn Leppert, but which known offender might have taken her. The distinction matters. It changes how tips are evaluated and which details are prioritized. Then, abruptly, one path closes. Christopher Wilder is killed during a confrontation with police. With his death, any possibility of confession or clarification vanishes. The theory that once felt promising collapses into uncertainty. There is no forensic evidence tying him to Tammy. No witness places them together. The case does not advance. The same happens with other suspected offenders. Each is examined. Each is ruled out not with certainty, but with insufficiency. The disappearance remains unattached. By the mid-1980s, the investigation finds itself in a familiar but dangerous position. Too much time has passed to rely on memory. Too many theories have been explored without result. The case has been everywhere except forward. Tammy Lynn Leppert's disappearance now carries a different weight. It is no longer only about where she went after standing in that parking lot. It is about how easily a case can be drawn into larger narratives that offer explanation without resolution. The search continues, but the focus has shifted again, leaving behind questions that were never fully answered and introducing new ones that may never be. As the investigation moves away from external suspects and collapses back toward the center, one element refuses to disappear. The things Tammy Lynn Leppert said before she vanished. Not what others believed about her, not how her behavior was interpreted afterward, but the words she used repeatedly and the structure of fear they revealed. For Linda Curtis, those words never lost urgency. From the beginning, she insists that Tammy's fear was not diffuse. It was not anxiety without an object. Tammy did not speak about being unsafe in general. She spoke about having seen something specific, something she was not supposed to see, something that placed her in danger not because of who she was, but because of what she knew. This distinction becomes the foundation of Linda's theory. In conversations with police, she returns again and again to the same sequence. The party Tammy attended alone weeks before her disappearance, the sudden withdrawal afterward, the refusal to eat or drink unless she controlled the container, the repeated questions framed as hypotheticals but delivered with urgency. Tammy's behavior, Linda argues, resembles someone who believes they are being watched, monitored, or evaluated by others who have motive and capacity. Law enforcement listens, but the challenge is structural. Tammy never names anyone. She never identifies a location. She never provides details that can be independently verified. Her statements point toward danger without pointing toward evidence. For investigators trained to act on corroboration, this creates a dilemma. The fear appears real, but its source remains unlocatable. The investigation attempts to engage the theory cautiously. Officers review the social environments Tammy moved through in the months before her disappearance. Modeling events, film-related gatherings, informal parties where industry figures and local residents mixed without formal oversight. The aim is not to validate a conspiracy, but to identify whether Tammy could plausibly have been exposed to criminal activity that would warrant intimidation or silencing. Nothing surfaces that can be confirmed. The absence of confirmation does not negate the theory, but it limits its operational value. Without names, dates, or locations, the idea of targeted removal remains a narrative without handles. At the same time, the unidentified phone calls continue to complicate the picture. They are not dismissed outright. Their tone differs from typical hoaxes. The caller does not seek attention. She does not provide dramatic claims. She does not contact the media. She calls police directly, twice, and offers reassurance rather than threat. The suggestion that Tammy is alive and pursuing nursing introduces continuity rather than chaos. Investigators attempt to treat the calls as potential signals. They review nursing programs regionally and beyond. They search enrollment records. They look for name variations. No match emerges. The calls cannot be traced. Without a technical anchor, the content remains unprovable. The calls introduce a new possibility without resolving the old ones. If Tammy is alive, then the disappearance becomes an act of escape rather than victimization. If the calls are false, they represent deliberate interference, either by someone seeking to mislead or by someone emotionally invested in the outcome. Neither explanation advances the investigation without additional data. What frustrates investigators is the consistency of ambiguity. Tammy's statements, her behavior, and the calls all point in a similar direction. Intentional concealment, fear of pursuit, avoidance of systems, but none of them intersect with verifiable facts. Each reinforces the others emotionally, but not evidentially. Internally, the case becomes difficult to classify. It does not fit cleanly into voluntary disappearance. Tammy left without resources, without preparation, without explanation to anyone she trusted. It does not fit cleanly into abduction. There are no witnesses, no scene, no demand, no body. It does not fit cleanly into mental health crisis alone, because the behavior shows coherence, not disorganization. Instead, the case occupies a narrow space between agency and threat. This ambiguity affects investigative posture. Officers continue to accept tips, but they are now filtered through competing frameworks. A sighting that suggests independence supports survival. A report of vulnerability supports victimization. Each new piece of information is interpreted differently depending on which theory it appears to strengthen. Linda Curtis remains dissatisfied with this balance. She believes the investigation has become too cautious, too dependent on proof that no longer exists. She argues that Tammy's fear should be treated as intelligence, not symptom. She insists that ignoring what Tammy said risks repeating the same mistake that allowed her disappearance to go unnoticed in the first place. Investigators document her concerns. They do not dismiss them, but without corroboration, they cannot elevate them. The case continues forward, but unevenly. Some days bring renewed activity, media attention, new tips, fresh interest. Other days bring nothing at all. The disappearance resists consolidation into a single narrative. Every attempt to explain it leaves something essential unaccounted for. By this stage, Tammy Lynn Leppert's case has accumulated competing explanations without resolving any of them. The search no longer hinges on finding a person in a place, but on finding a version of events that can survive scrutiny. Whether Tammy left to escape a danger she believed was real, whether she encountered that danger after stepping out of the car, or whether the truth exists somewhere between those possibilities remains unresolved. What is clear is that the disappearance did not begin at the Glass Bank parking lot. It only became visible there. The investigation continues, shaped as much by what Tammy said before she vanished as by the silence that followed. As other theories lose momentum, attention returns to the only person who can place Tammy Lynn Leppert alive in the hours before she vanished. This return is not dramatic, nor is it framed as a revelation. It is procedural. When possibilities thin out, investigations circle back to what remains closest to the point of disappearance. The male friend who drove Tammy to Cocoa Beach is interviewed again. His role in the case has never changed. He is the last known person to see her. He provides the location. He provides the context. He leaves the scene. From an investigative standpoint, this places him in a position of relevance rather than guilt. Relevance alone, however, is not enough to sustain escalation. Officers review his statements side by side, comparing early interviews with later ones. The language remains consistent. The sequence does not shift. There are no contradictions significant enough to justify reclassification. He describes an argument. He describes frustration. He describes pulling into the Glass Bank parking lot and leaving Tammy there. He does not describe fear. He does not describe force. He does not describe following her afterward. The consistency works in his favor. At the same time, the decision itself raises questions that cannot be ignored. Leaving an 18-year-old woman barefoot, without money, in a public parking lot after a heated argument is not illegal, but it is consequential. Investigators note this distinction carefully. Poor judgment does not equate to criminal liability. The file reflects this separation clearly. Linda Curtis challenges this distinction. She states that Tammy was afraid of this individual before the disappearance. She insists that the argument was not an isolated event, but part of a broader pattern of tension. She questions why someone aware of Tammy's instability would leave her alone in such a condition. These concerns are recorded. They are revisited. But again, they do not intersect with corroborating evidence. Law enforcement examines the friend's background. There is no criminal history that suggests escalation, no record of violent behavior, no prior complaints, no known connection to individuals or activities that align with other theories in the case. His life continues without disruption. He does not flee. He does not change his story. He does not attempt to insert himself into the investigation beyond what is required. This creates an uncomfortable equilibrium. From the family's perspective, the friend represents a point where different outcomes were possible. From law enforcement's perspective, he represents a closed loop, an event with no actionable continuation. The difference between those perspectives never resolves. Investigators consider the practical alternatives. If Tammy left the parking lot on foot, the window for encountering someone else is wide. The area allows immediate access to passing vehicles, nearby businesses, and the beach itself. Any subsequent interaction could have occurred beyond the friend's awareness. Without witnesses, the chain of events after his departure remains unobservable. If Tammy entered another vehicle voluntarily, investigators must account for why. Was she seeking help? Transport? Escape? Was the interaction framed as assistance or opportunity? None of these questions can be answered without someone coming forward. Officers also consider whether the argument itself could have drawn attention. But no one reports hearing raised voices. No one reports seeing Tammy visibly distressed. The lack of external observation neutralizes the argument as a trigger event. Over time, the male friend's role becomes fixed in the case file. Last known associate, cooperative, not charged. This categorization does not satisfy everyone. Public discourse, fueled by repetition and absence, tends to assign meaning where investigation cannot. The friend's proximity becomes symbolic. His decision to leave becomes a focal point for frustration. But within the constraints of evidence, frustration does not transform into proof. The investigation acknowledges this openly in internal assessments. There is no basis for arrest. There is no basis for surveillance. There is no basis for coercive interrogation. To proceed further would require new information, someone who saw Tammy after she exited the vehicle, or evidence that the friend's account is false. Neither appears. As the years pass, this part of the case remains unchanged. The friend is not elevated to suspect. He is not formally cleared in a way that closes inquiry. He occupies a permanent middle ground, defined by proximity rather than implication. This unresolved status mirrors the case itself. Tammy Lynn Leppert's disappearance resists narratives that rely on singular responsibility. The final known interaction offers context but not causation. It explains how she arrived at the place where she vanished, but not what happened next. For investigators, this distinction is crucial. The case does not hinge on identifying a villain already in the frame. It hinges on recovering a moment that was never observed. The friend's departure marks the end of the visible story. Everything after exists in silence. That silence becomes the investigation's greatest obstacle. Without testimony, without evidence, without a second witness, the space between Tammy standing alone in a parking lot and Tammy no longer being anywhere anyone can find is irreducible. It cannot be compressed through pressure or inference. The investigation continues with this understanding. The male friend remains part of the file, not because he holds answers, but because he represents the last point at which the case still had shape. After that, the trail dissolves. Tammy Lynn Leppert remains missing, and the final person known to have been with her remains both essential and insufficient to explain why. Time does not move evenly after a disappearance like this. It stretches in some places and collapses in others, leaving behind long corridors where nothing changes except the people who are forced to walk through them. For Linda Curtis, the days after Tammy Lynn Leppert vanished do not arrange themselves into before and after. They flatten into a continuous present, defined not by events, but by vigilance. The house does not become quiet. It becomes alert. Doors are listened to more than they are closed. The phone is answered quickly, even years later, even when the caller ID shows a familiar number. Tammy's room is not preserved as a shrine, nor is it dismantled as a gesture of acceptance. Objects remain where they were last useful. Clothing stays folded. Personal items are not thrown away. Nothing is packed up to make room for certainty. Linda does not speak about closure. She speaks about readiness. Her life reorganizes around a conditional future, one in which Tammy might still return. This is not presented as hope in the abstract, but as a refusal to eliminate a possibility that has never been disproven. Tammy has not been declared dead. No remains have been found. No legal threshold has been crossed that would allow the past to settle. In practical terms, this means waiting without resolution. The locks on the house remain unchanged. Tammy had a key. Changing the locks would mean choosing a version of events where that key no longer matters. Linda does not make that choice. She does not frame it as symbolism. It is simply an action she does not take. Interactions with the outside world become more deliberate. When people ask questions, Linda answers carefully. She does not speculate. She does not dramatize. She repeats what Tammy said. She repeats what Tammy did. Over time, this repetition becomes an act of preservation rather than persuasion. The system surrounding the case continues to function, but at a distance. Police files remain open. Periodic checks are conducted. Tammy's name stays active in national databases. Age progression images are produced, each one carefully calibrated to suggest time without asserting fate. The face changes incrementally, but the eyes remain recognizable. These images circulate quietly, resurfacing at anniversaries and milestones, each one asking the same question without altering its phrasing. Is anyone looking who recognizes her? For law enforcement, the case becomes an example of endurance rather than progress. It is not inactive, but it does not advance. It requires maintenance rather than momentum. Records are preserved. Information is updated when possible, but without new input, the system can only hold space. This holding pattern exposes the limits of institutional design. Missing person investigations are built to respond to movement, bank activity, sightings, communications, recoverable evidence. Tammy's disappearance offers none of these. She does not leave a trail that decays. She leaves a blank that does not age. The longer time passes, the more the absence resists interpretation. For Linda, the difficulty is not that the system fails entirely, but that it cannot replace what is missing. No procedure can substitute for knowing where her daughter is. No database entry can explain why a young woman who was afraid enough to ask whether someone might try to kill her was left standing alone in public and then vanished without a trace. Grief, in this context, does not follow a recognized path. There is no funeral, no official end. There is no moment when the past can be acknowledged as complete. Instead, grief becomes a static condition, one that exists alongside daily life rather than interrupting it. Linda continues working. She continues speaking publicly when asked. She continues to remind people that Tammy existed not only as a missing person, but as someone who was once present, visible, and known. Over time, public interest fades and resurges in cycles. Each resurgence brings attention, speculation, and renewed questions. Each fade leaves Linda alone with the same uncertainty she has carried since the first night Tammy did not come home. The attention never delivers answers. It only confirms that the disappearance remains unresolved. The passage of decades introduces a new layer of complexity. Tammy is no longer imagined only as 18. She becomes 20, then 30, then older. The question shifts from where she went to who she might be now. The possibility that she is alive does not diminish with time. It transforms. Survival no longer requires immediate explanation. It requires continuity. If Tammy is alive, she has lived a life beyond record. If she is not, then the absence itself has become her legacy. Neither outcome provides relief. What remains is a case that never hardens into history. It stays present, unfinished, demanding a form of attention that does not resolve into meaning. For Linda, this means carrying not only the loss of her daughter, but the responsibility of keeping her disappearance from becoming invisible. The system can keep files open. It can update images. It can accept tips. But it cannot answer the question that matters most: whether Tammy Lynn Leppert is still somewhere in the world, choosing silence as protection, or whether she was removed from it in a way that left no record behind. That question does not end. It follows Linda through years that are otherwise unremarkable. It sits beside ordinary moments. It resurfaces without warning. It shapes decisions without announcing itself. It is not loud. It does not demand attention. It simply remains. Tammy Lynn Leppert is missing. Not concluded. Not resolved. Not explained. And the cost of that absence is not measured only in unanswered questions, but in the life that continues around them, shaped permanently by the refusal of the past to declare itself finished. If you value slow, careful true crime reporting that prioritizes facts over spectacle, consider subscribing to the channel. Like the video to help it reach a wider audience, and share it so this case remains visible. If you have information or thoughts on the case, leave a comment below.